And it's Steve Tasker who has been all over the field.
Kind of unique. He was kind of a dual-role player for you.
Steve!
A balloon.
Steve! A blimp? We're not even in the stratosphere of normalcy here. Welcome to One Bills Live. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker, who is in a far greater mood on the heels of a burrito downing. I'm telling you, this man is very easy to please. You put a burrito in front of this man, his whole mood changes.
I'm a simple traveler making my way in the universe. I'm a humble pilgrim.
He housed that thing in his usual 4-minute time span.
It was good.
It's nothing short of impressive, people. I've got to tell you, we have to get Steve, when the pandemic is over, into a competitive eating contest. Because I think
burrito. I can eat one.
You could do damage.
I don't have the capacity, though. It's not like I can eat like 10 burritos in 10 minutes.
But the thing is, you eat so fast that I don't think you would realize when you were full. So to be able to push through that threshold, that's a valuable asset for a competitive eater to have.
It does take my body and the the dopamine to kick in after a long time. After it's easy for me to get uncomfortably full. It happens quick.
Yeah.
I told you too. I came in. I'm in a pretty good mood this morning because I had to spit my coffee out of my mouth morning when I was sitting there.
Yeah.
And my wife. I don't know if that's like my wife. We do a lot of stuff online, pay bills and stuff.
Everybody does.
Right.
It's easier.
Occasionally, though, we don't. We got something was not set up for it or whatever. We got a bill from the Easy Pass people.
Okay.
New York pay by mail toll or something like that, right? .com, .gov, whatever. And we got a bill. It was like $6.28. My son, who's he's a
lives in Ohio.
Yeah, lives in Louisville.
Oh, Louisville, sorry.
And he made a trip back, and they caught him on camera, sent the bill to us. No, $6, right? $6 and change. So I've got the thing it prints your checks, right? I don't write them by hand. I print them, right? So it goes up into the whatever. So I print the check, sign it, shove it in the envelope, away it goes. Couple of weeks later, which is today, my wife goes, "We got a bookkeeping problem." I go, "What's up?" She goes, and she's over there, and she goes back and gets a copy of the check that I printed to pay this $6 and change bill. Picture an extra zero and no point on that. I overpaid this bill by $6,000.
Or $5,994.
No, it was $6,000 plus.
Okay.
It was like just over $6,000. I overpaid this. I wrote the check. She's got a picture of the check. Look,
that's a bad time to have an extra zero in there, Steve.
I got no defense. Right, it's me. So I'm like 2 seconds later, I got the bill. I'm like, I'm on the phone, and I'm thinking this is New York State. I'm calling. Right, this is I got no shot. Yeah, I'm gonna have to drive for 1,000 years to pay this to get my money back.
Free driving for life.
I'm have to drive in a loop around.
Free driving for life.
Right? So I'm thinking this ain't going to go well. So I navigate, press, if you want to do this, press 1. If you want to do that, press 2. If you want to do this other thing, press 3. If you want to do this other thing. So I press 9. Coop, by the fine. Right, so I press 9. I'm thinking this, call times, we're experiencing higher than volume, right?
Well, always.
Okay.
Always higher than annual.
Somebody almost immediately picks up. Lady named Barbara. She goes, "Hello," and I said, "I'm calling to," she goes, "What? Give me the license plate number." And I got the bill. So at first I think she's like my license number.
Yeah, it's your son's car.
My driver's license number. I'm like, what number do you need? She goes, "The license plate number of the car." I go, "Oh," and it was on the bill because the picture is like it's at night. It came. So I read it to her, and she goes, "Okay, thank you." And she goes, "Oh, you overpaid."
Just a little bit.
And I go, "Can you guess why I'm calling?" And she starts laughing. She goes, "Just hang on a minute." So she pops off, and I go on hold for like 5 minutes, and she comes back on. So I'm thinking, okay, this is getting worse. But it's happened pretty easy so far. She comes on. She goes, "Okay, I had to talk to my supervisor because with this much money, I thought perhaps you might need it quicker, for a mistake like this. So I tried to expedite the pay." She says, "It'll be a couple of days, but we're going to give you back the money, no problem." I'm like, "I go, seriously?" She goes, yeah. She goes, I go, is there anything else you need from me? She goes, no, it should be. I'm like, so
money out, money in.
Right. Catastrophe averted. Can you imagine? What would your wife do if you puked up $6,000 when you didn't know you did that?
I'd probably be deaf in one ear from the shouting.
Oh, the stink eye I got, right? Because, I have no defense for being a complete idiot. I didn't even look at the,
all I know is my account would have been overdrawn. I don't have that much money in my account to begin with.
That makes, bro,
yeah,
me and you both. And she does all the online, I get in there one time and I puke it up like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's a strategy. If I screw that up so bad,
she'll take it over.
It's one less thing on my plate.
I'd
like to say that was my plan. It was not.
As you were telling me this story, I got this image in my head of the people at the office at Easy Pass buying themselves like a lavish lunch spread with your extra funds.
Right. Hey!
We're catering today for lunch. This jackwagon Steve Tasker has paid $6,000 on his toll bill. What an idiot.
On a $6.28
Do you want extra sour cream for the burritos? We're going to have a whole spread in about an hour. We already catered.
Here's what happened. It was $6.28 twice. It was coming in and going out. $6.28. And somehow, and I don't know how it happened, the check was $6,028.
So it wasn't a zero at the end. It was in the hundreds column.
Right. So it was $6,028 that I like.
So basically, Steve, instead of pressing the period button, you pressed a zero.
Apparently.
Somehow.
Among other things. Among not even like looking at the check when it.
Well, yeah. Whether you entered it or printed it out.
Yeah, right? Like
you had two cracks at correcting that.
Yeah, that's a signal at the.
That is
a signal at the.
That's
checked
a clerical error with a capital C.
I cannot be trusted. With a $6 bill, I cannot be trusted.
Oh my God,
that's a sad realization.
That's a great story.
That's a sad realization for a man my age.
If they could not have reimbursed you, I'm wondering how long you and your family, of which there are a lot of people with vehicles, would be able to drive free across this country.
I would expect
whatever state had an Easy Pass.
Right,
you could go anywhere.
I would expect a
at
thank you.
No cost.
I would expect a thank you note from at least the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles, if not Andrew Cuomo himself. Like I say,
Mr. Tasker.
We need more citizens like you.
With humble appreciation and heartfelt thanks, we thank you for your donation to the highway. We will personally repave your driveway.
Right?
Among other things, as a sign of our appreciation. Oh my gosh, that is great.
That's not. You can laugh
about it now. You're getting reimbursed.
Right. Even now, I'm still living on the grace of the Postal Service, because you mentioned my driveway. My mailbox got taken out again.
Oh, so by a snowplow?
Right. So now
I
don't know what it was, snowplow or not. No, it wasn't a snowplow, because it was. My neighbor goes, "Hey, I picked up your mail for you." I go, "Wait, what?" She goes, "Because it was."
Scattered all over the
right,
street?
because your mailbox and your mail was scattered across the street. I was like, oh, my gosh. So, and it wasn't like there was no snow at the time. It was just somebody taking a turn a little too fast and just.
Hit it with a car, you think?
No, dude, it's the fourth time.
How sharp a turn is your street?
Well, it's not the sharp turn of it. I think it's the unexpected little bit of it, plus it's the speed with which people like to take it rather than...
So it's like a blind turn? Or
I think they come around it. It's not blind. But when they come around it, I think they hit the gas a little bit and then, yeah. Everything, it's not like
the
covered.
Fourth time this has happened. Wow. Yeah, I live in a cul-de-sac, and so that turn...
Right.
Can be kind of tricky with a big truck, you know, and a snowplow.
But those guys, snowplow, yeah.
So these guys come through, and every winter I hold my breath. Like, am I going to have to replace it? So I've had to replace it twice. And the town's pretty good about, They'll reimburse you up to a certain dollar level,
right?
If their plow truck takes out your mailbox.
Plow truck on this.
But the first time it happened, took out mine, my neighbor's, and the neighbor after that, like 3 in a row, bang, bang, bang. Like there's got to be a course correction there at some point.
Dude, come on,
like 3 in a row.
This is like
When did you wake up and stop?
If it was a plow guy in Buffalo, though, it might have been 4 a.m. He might have been working since 6 o'clock 3 days before, right? It was like a 24-hour.
Look, I'm not going to say it's easy.
66-hour shift or something.
I was just like, wow, that guy was like 3 in a row. Either that or somebody ticked him off.
His give-a-hoot gauge was busted.
Yeah. I mean, my mailbox was 2 houses over. Carried it for a while, too.
See, here's the thing, too. I was, and now you start to, after the second or third, now mine, the fourth time, you start to think about revenge, Well, like I'm going to go out there and put in an 8-inch steel pipe with concrete in it, 8 feet deep.
8 feet?
Let's see, with a concrete base.
8 feet?
Let's see him clip that one off, But
gonna put a dent.
But at least this next time, I think what I'm going to do is put it on the other side of my driveway, so they give it a little, like another 15 feet of correction.
Yeah.
But I got to think too, man. Did it do some damage? I mean, what are they driving?
Yeah, that's surprising. 4 times, just
And now
our only threat is the snowplow in the winter. That's it.
Yeah.
That's our only threat.
I mean, I went the measurements and everything. I put it back for what I'm supposed to, and now I'm running out of places to dig a new post hole because I can't put it here because the old one's there. This post is still broken off down in there.
Oh yeah,
this one's still
right.
broken off down there. Where am I going to put?
You're not digging those out,
right?
Why are you going to waste your time doing that?
So
that's a situation.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. You can't set it back any further because then the mail carrier can't get the.
Well, I also have like most people that live a little bit almost rural. You got a ditch with a culvert in there, and you can't put the post in the culvert. You got to move it backwards of it. And if you put it in forwards, I mean, you're hanging out over the white line. So, and if you put it behind the culvert too far, the guy's got to drop 2 wheels into a ditch to get to the.
Yeah.
So
that's a conundrum. That's a tough one. First world problem, Steve.
No, the bad check was the first world problem. Printing it out of your printer and not reading it and just autopiling that.
Can you imagine without being able to digitally do that stuff, how long that would take? You'd be sweating that check for like a week if it was snail mail days.
Maybe a month.
Provided you even got a hold of somebody.
Right. Because there's no other way to get a hold of it. You usually go online.
Like they'd have to turn around and write you a check and send that in the mail.
Right. I just got to say, for all the grief we give New York State and all that, they were on it.
They turned it around right away.
They were better than I was. Right. We'll
That's
see.
good.
I see. Now theoretically, I should see the money in a couple of days, but this may where they get me. But so far, it's been perfect.
You are a lucky fella. We have a jam-packed show for you today here on a midweek edition of One Bills Live. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we'll have the newest running back on Buffalo's roster, Matt Breida, joining us. As you know, he signed late last week, so happy to have him on the show today. And we'll get his thoughts about joining this roster and, his role, where he thinks it's going. And so we'll catch up with him. And then second hour of the show, we've got USA Today NFL columnist Jared Bell. Plenty to discuss with him, especially on the heels of some of the comments by Commissioner Goodell, which included he expects all the fans back in the stands in the fall. And we'll get his take on that, along with the addition of a 17th game and where we think things are headed for the off-season programs, whether they'll be fully virtual again like they were last year or if there'll be some combination of the old way of doing it and the new way of doing it. So we'll catch up with Jared on that. And then third hour of our show, we will have Hall of Famer Bill Polian, also a Wall of Famer here in Buffalo, as everyone knows. The 6-time NFL Executive of the Year will join us to talk about a number of NFL topics, along with Hall of Fame coach Marv Levy, who is a candidate for the CFL Hall of Fame. So we'll talk to Bill Polian about that, since he and Marv worked together for the Montreal Alouettes back in those CFL days of the 70s.
Might be the first time they worked together.
I believe you're right, yeah.
And
they worked in all three leagues together. Think about that. Yeah. That's kind of cool.
The CFL, the USFL, and then the NFL. I'll be interested to talk to Bill about, why Marv's not in already. But I've been getting some correspondence from people about Marv's candidacy of the CFL, and he won 2 great cups with the Montreal Alouettes.
Yeah,
and and that was after he was a Kansas City Chiefs head coach. He went to the CFL to be a
Chiefs,
head coach.
then up there, then the Blitz, then the Bills.
I think so. He was out of work maybe for 2 or 3 years after the Blitz, after the USFL folded, and then he was with the Bills for 11 and a half years. Well, I know it was 11 and a half years because his first game as head coach was my first game as a player.
Yeah.
And my last game ended up being his last game as well. So
Look at that.
He couldn't go on without me. He had to retire after I quit.
Steve Tether Tasker is how he referred
right.
to you, I believe.
Yeah.
Since you were tied to him like a tether.
Yeah.
Twitter poll today, since we thought, hey, we're talking to Bill Polian about Marv Levy and what a great combination they were. We're quickly developing a strong appreciation for the combination that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have been in their 4 years together here in Buffalo. And so we thought we'd throw it out to you today. What is the most underrated part of the roster build under Beane and McDermott? We obviously know the headline things that these guys have done, the big moves that really paid huge dividends for this team, whether it was, moving up to get Josh Allen or the trade for Stephon Diggs last year, just over a year ago. But there are some things under the radar that they've done exceptionally well that I think deserves some recognition and accolades as well. And so we figured we'd tap into the brains of the Bills fans to see where they're at on it. So what's the most underrated part of the roster build under Beane and McDermott here in Buffalo? And the choices are open to you. We want you to come up with some answers here because I think this is a discussion that can go in many different directions based on the philosophies of these two men and how to build this team into a championship contender.
And I think most people, too, are up to snuff enough to remember, just 3 years ago or 4 years ago when they took over and all the moves that they made. You mean all the way back to trading Sammy Watt or cutting or trading. I can't even remember. They traded him, right? Traded Sammy Watkins, got rid of Cordy Glenn. They let go of
traded Ronald Darby.
Ronald Darby. All of these things happened. And, Marcel Darius, the whole 9 yards, when they finally got it under control. Then they came back and they drafted Josh, moved up 2 or 3 times, plus signing all the free agents that they did, from Starlo Tulele, Trent Murphy, who else? Gee whiz. I mean, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer. They all haven't been home runs, but they've all been pretty big contributors, if not home runs. And their philosophy of team building, the way they drafted Tre'Davious White, Tremaine Edmonds, Josh, Milano, a 5th rounder, all of that stuff. There's just so much that's gone on over the last 4 years to get us to a point where the Bills are considered one of the best teams in the league. And going forward, that they're on the uptick still. Even after getting to the championship game, their arrow is still pointed up, I think, for a lot of people. So of all of those things, do you think back, what do you remember that maybe nobody else talks about, or what do you think happened that made you think, wow, this is better than I thought it was going to be. This meant more than I thought it was going to be. And then, and I'd love to hear from you. I want to hear what you think because there's, like I said, unlisted, there's a bazillion things that they've had to do.
Yeah, including clean up a bad cap situation.
Right.
There's also some NFL news and notes, both concerning the Bills and around the league. As we mentioned, Commissioner Roger Goodell said yesterday he expects to have full stadiums with fans for the 2021 season, even though the picture is far from clear right now, he sounded pretty confident yesterday that they will have stadiums back at full capacity this coming fall, which is exciting for everybody that attends games. Even if you're not a season ticket holder, you attend 1 or 2 games a year. That's good news. And NFL teams can start their off-season programs on April 19th. And then there was a report out there, Steve, because as the 17th game was officially approved by the owners yesterday, it was also communicated that beginning in 2022, some of those 17th games for each year will be played internationally. And we know that they've played in London a good deal, Mexico City, among other places. But now some other destinations are being floated, and there was a report yesterday that said games are likely to be played, maybe not in 2022, but sometime in the near future, in Germany and South America.
What city?
Well, I didn't see the specific city, but it's being thrown out there. I would think that Brazil would probably have a good look at it.
Right.
Sao Paulo or something like that.
The
Rio.
Olympics, Rio.
Yeah. I mean, they have the facilities from the Olympics,
right,
you would think,
exactly.
so that would certainly help their cause. So yeah.
That's kind of interesting.
That's an option.
Nothing in Japan or China.
I didn't see that in the report that I saw. We mentioned Germany, you and I, when we were talking about that, just because they are nuts about American football in Germany.
Yeah,
going all the way back to the days of the NFL Europe.
I played a game in Germany. It was right after the wall came down.
Yeah, and in NFL, when they had NFL Europe, there were 2 teams in Germany, one in Berlin and one in Frankfurt.
That's right.
So
yeah, they were crazy for it.
Yeah, they enjoyed it a lot.
That was nice.
So, yeah, I think they're a good candidate for that. The NFLPA still pushing for a virtual offseason program. We're going to have to see where that lands as negotiations continue. And we're closing in, Steve, we're under 3 weeks now before this April 19th date kicks in to start the offseason programs. I imagine they will begin virtually. But I wonder if coaches can convince ownership, hey, we just give us a week. Just give us a week of practices, whether it's at the end of May, the beginning of June. Just give us something where we feel we can rep some stuff on the field out of pads and at least feel like we have some sense of on-field readiness. And then the Players Association is probably going to come back and say, well, we didn't need that last year and everything worked out fine. So I don't know what the hang-up is.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see where that plays out and just exactly what the offseason looks like going forward, whether it's much like it was during the pandemic last year, which was completely virtual, whether it goes back to the old way of doing things, which I highly doubt, or whether it's some kind of hybrid model where it falls somewhere in between.
Yeah, certainly it's not going to be throw everything that they learned or did last year out to the window. None of that's going to happen. I think some of it is going to happen. I think there's going to be a lot more virtual meetings. It'll be interesting to see what limitations they put on virtual meetings. If you don't have to travel to the city your team is in and you can chime in virtually, why is there even a limitation on when they can talk to you? Say, hey, on this, like tomorrow, we're going to have a Zoom meeting. Jump on here with us. Let's go. You know what I mean? There's nothing that's, to me, if you're going to say, okay, if you want it all virtual, then we're going to do it all off season whenever we want. That seems like an okay give back to me. If you don't have to be there, you can set aside a couple hours from wherever you're at. You're going to be working out anyway. I think there's a lot of space for both sides to negotiate some common ground, to me.
So we'll wait and see where that lands. They got to come to some kind of an agreement before you get to April 19th. So I would imagine it's coming down the pike here sooner rather than later. Yeah. And then the Bills news, as we know, they signed free agent offensive tackle Bobby Hart to a 1-year deal yesterday. Been a starter in Cincinnati the last few years. Had some struggles last year, as did most of that offensive line, and it was part of the reason why Joe Burrow didn't finish the season, ultimately tore an ACL. He took a pounding last year.
A lot of their offensive linemen struggled or seemed to struggle in Cincinnati. And I'm thinking,
When you see that across the board, what does that say to you?
That's bad. I don't know. I think they got to
coaching.
Yeah.
And
that says something about them. I mean, if they've got an offensive line that's now certainly they may not have any good players, and Bobby Hart may come in here and he may not even be able to compete for a spot. But if you've got a bunch of guys who have some physical gifts and they're not working well together as a group, even though they've got some high draft picks in there, and I don't know that the Cincinnati Bengals did. I think they lost their first rounder 2 years ago to an injury, and he was out all that year. But it's a shared responsibility, and that's what the Bills are hoping for. If they're looking at him and you can watch the guy play, and it's like, I don't know what's he doing here, He's not showing much technique and all that. So that, you got to lay that on some coaches. And maybe the guy's not coachable. I get all that. But I know this, and I've said it a ton. NFL coaches believe they can fix guys.
Yeah.
So if you get a guy that's got some physical abilities, they'll say, "Oh, I can help. I can work with him."
Well, and the Bills wear that on their sleeve. They say we will help you be the best version of yourself. Right. So we'll see what they can do with Bobby Hart and whether he can be, one of the 53 men on this roster. I still firmly believe they're going to draft a tackle pretty soon. Now, there was a report yesterday that the Bills were hosting free agent linebacker Tyrell Adams on a visit. Now there are reports that he has, in fact, signed a one-year deal out there. Aaron Wilson, who covers the Texans, and Tyrell Adams is a former Houston Texan, was a starter for them last year. Prior to that, had been a backup, also played with the Raiders organization at the beginning of his career. So this is, a guy that, if the reports are accurate, it's probably going to help this team from a depth perspective, knowing that the Bills, more often than not, just have two linebackers on the field in the form of Edmonds and Milano.
Yep.
And they have lost one linebacker from their contingent from last season. Delshon Phillips was waived in January. He has since signed with the Giants, I believe, in free agency. Yep. So they're looking to, fill the back end of that depth chart with players because they're a little thin in terms of depth, the linebacker position. So get a former starter coming in here. That's pretty darn good. So we'll wait until there's official confirmation from the team on that. So that's the report right now. Linebacker Tyrell Adams, free agent from Houston, reportedly going to sign a one-year contract with the Bills as Buffalo continues to work on the roster. Still a lot of open spots to get up to 90 here, Steve, in the offseason. So plenty of room to add. Yep. I just wonder, money-wise, how close it is right now.
None of these guys are going to break the top 51.
No, they're not.
So
no, they
can sign as many of these guys as they want and not even go plus or minus on the cap.
Yeah. We are going to take a break here because when we come back, we'll be talking to another new Buffalo Bill. Running back Matt Breida will be joining us when we return here on One Bills Live, presented by Kaleida Health. It's Buffalo Bills Radio. Welcome back to One Bills Live. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. Waiting to get Matt Breida on. We're trying to get in touch with him at this point in time. Wanted to bring this one to your attention, Steve. So, NBA teams, NHL teams are traveling, by air this time of year. Baseball teams will be doing the same in the not-too-distant future as the season's almost underway. The Utah Jazz plane, Steve.
Was it a charter?
Yeah, had to be rerouted the other day. Hit a flock of birds shortly after takeoff. And had to be rerouted. There are images of the nose of the plane, which made initial contact. The reason this is
got splatters on it and everything?
Yeah.
Oh, gross.
The reason this is when birds hit planes, it doesn't sound, it's like, plane
happen.
versus birds, plane wins. Well, not necessarily. Because if enough of those birds
sucked into the jet engine,
if they get into the jet turbine, you lose an engine.
Right.
We all know the miracle on the Hudson River with Sully Sullenberger.
That's right.
He lost both engines. There's a glide into the Hudson River for a water landing.
Wait a minute. I'm looking at the picture now. How big was this bird? Was it a pterodactyl?
I think it was a flock of birds. They didn't hit just one.
The thing's got like a 3-foot
There's a lot of
stain
blood
on it.
Yeah, it's that's probably bigger than 3 feet, Steve. Our MSG
Oh, my
viewers
gosh, look
are
at the guys below it.
Looking at the nose of the plane. They hit about 10 of them, I would guess.
They hit Rodan.
Something.
You remember that story, Rodan? You know that?
Yeah.
That King Kong and
Godzilla
is Rodan?
Godzilla,
So that's no wonder it made the news.
So I'm going to tell you, Steve, in all the years of traveling with the Bills, this happened to us once.
Oh, did it?
We're flying into Green Bay, and we're on final approach. Not final approach, but we're descending. We're coming down.
Yeah.
And I'm in an aisle seat, so I can't see outside at all. But all of a sudden we hear boom, 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 boom. I was like, now the plane didn't shake or anything, but it was a loud noise. So I'm looking at my coworker and I'm like, what the heck was that? And he's looking out the window. He's like, I think we might have hit some birds. I said, why? He goes, there's a lot of feathers out there. I was like, oh boy. So now I'm thinking, okay, nothing seemed different about the plane. Plane made the landing. We were fine. We get off the plane, and as you know, very often when you get off the team plane, you walk on the tarmac. Right. You don't go down a jetway like you do in an airport. You get off, you go down a staircase, you're on the tarmac, and then you get on the buses and you go to the hotel.
Yeah, for people who don't know, they pull the buses right out to the plane out on a big park, like the parking lot there for the planes. And we just walk across the parking lot and climb on the buses and no fuss, no muss.
So we get off the plane and we have to walk around the front of the plane to get to the buses. And so I'm like, everybody's like, whoa, they're pointing. Like I'm coming down the stairs. See all these guys pointing at the front of the plane. So you look at the front of the plane, the nose of the plane is indented.
What do you got, a dent?
Like, we hit this flock square. And I got to believe maybe even head on. Like the V of the flock came straight at the nose. Like, it was a game of chicken with a flock of Canadian geese.
With a chicken.
And so
they dented the plane.
And it was there was blood everywhere. So we're on the bus going to the hotel, and the guy that runs the charters for the charter company, he travels with the team, Bill. So he's on the bus, and he's 2 seats away from me. I'm like, hey, is everything all right, with the plane? He's like, well, he goes, it got a little sketchy there for a second. I said, why? He said, well, they took out one of our engines. So all the birds that hit the front slid off the front to one side, right into the engine turbine, shut it down. He goes, yeah, we were down to one engine for the last 20 minutes of the flight. I said, well, you could fly on one engine. He goes, yeah, but you got to plan ahead. I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, we were looking for farm fields in case we had to land early. I was like, oh.
Yeah, I didn't need to know that.
Thanks for getting us in. Yeah. Appreciate that.
Appreciate the extra
But it happens more than you think.
That's an enormous stain on that plane for the Utah Jazz.
Let's not forget this, okay? Birds.
Well, they disintegrate.
There are a lot of feathers and hollow bones.
Every ounce of
everything else is fluid, pretty much,
right.
for lack of a better term. And
yeah,
that's that can get dicey sometimes.
Yeah, there's tons of I've got tons of stories in my in the recesses of my mind from flights and planes and things that happened on those charter flights. It's not all of them are pretty like that, but or not that one was, but yeah, that's amazing that doesn't happen more often. I guess it does happen more often than you think, but why don't they do something about that?
Well, how are you going to control where birds are going to fly?
Yeah, but I mean, put like a
What
grill.
Do you want, like a cow catcher like they have on trains?
Well, something.
I'm sorry. I have an image in my head
of
catching
bird catcher.
birds
Look
in
at that.
midair.
They got the thing ripped off the paint job of that
the paneling.
jet.
It looked like.
Oh my! Ooh, that's.
That turned into the meat
a bad
grinder
Thanksgiving right there. That's I mean that. What do you do? I mean, plan ahead, land in a farm field.
I do wonder why they don't put a screen over the engines.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be like a cow catcher on a locomotive.
Like a pointed screen.
It's got to be something.
Kind of shepherd the
right
stuff around the engine.
To deflect it, something.
I mean, believe me, I'm not an aviation engineer or anything close to it.
Because
but
if you did that,
I wonder if you need enough airflow coming through the engine compartment, and if a screen would restrict it too much. But
come on, you got to figure that out. Come on,
I would think so.
Because even if you could just deflect, most of it, so that if it did go in, enough to shut the engine down would not get through the turbine.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, they got to. Yeah, it happens enough where I would think they would try to rectify that. Look at us trying to solve the world's problems here.
We're all over the map today. It's a slow day in March.
We are far from being eminently qualified for such decisions, but we'll still take a shot at it. We're talking about the most underrated moves that Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott have pulled off here in the roster build of the Bills here over the last 4 years. We wanted to leave it to you instead of giving you choices, so you could come to us with what you think has been some of the more underrated parts of the roster build here. Obviously, the trade up to get Josh Allen is a major cornerstone of the decision-making and the roster building here. Similarly, the Stephon Diggs trade last year, a gigantic headline-type move that paid huge dividends for this football team. There have been a lot of under-the-radar moves that this front office has made.
Right. And they're not all going to be home runs. Even some of the free agents that they signed have been just okay or maybe not at all. Think about this. They re-signed Quentin Spain after a nice year he had. 2 games into the season, he was benched. 5 games in, he's gone.
But by the same token, they signed Darrell Williams to a 1-year deal last year. Guy became their starting right tackle, stabilized that position after it was a platoon position the year before, and now he's locked in there for the next 3 seasons.
Yeah, that's big.
That's an underrated move,
Yeah.
I want to know which ones of those that fans
now,
like
certainly,
the most.
As we get into the future and we got further and further away from those early moves that they made, all of them look like, hey, they were great, smart moves. But back at the time, for instance, the first couple of moves they made in free agency, they signed Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer. Everybody's like, it was a yawner. It was like,
they weren't household names.
Yeah, exactly. And they were safeties.
And they signed them to long-term contracts, a 4-year deal and a 5-year deal.
They were big deals. And everybody was like, they're not corners. I mean, what are they, they just didn't register. And all of a sudden, those guys are like on the last 4 years, Poyer and Hyde may be on the Mount Rushmore of this team over the last 4 years. You know what I mean?
They're cornerstone players. I think you can make that argument.
Right? I mean, those guys were where would the defense be without them? They're playmakers. They get guys lined up right. Yeah, I'm all about it. And that when it happened, like I said, people were like, okay. Jordan Poyer is with Cleveland. He's with Micah Hyde was with Green Bay. How good can he be? They're letting him go, letting him walk, that kind of thing. And certainly the Bills signed them both to long-term deals, which was a huge commitment right out of the gate. Both of them. If it was possible for them to overplay those contracts, at least in the importance they've been to this squad, those 2 guys might be prime candidates for it. They've been fantastic, and that would, to me, at the time it was done, would be a highly underrated signing, an underrated move by Beane and McDermott.
Right, and I think you also have to look at the value of the culture build and how that has benefited them in the roster build. At least we're seeing more evidence of it now. And I guess what I mean by that, Steve, is you look at the ability to re-sign John Feliciano and Darrell Williams. They did it at probably below market value cost for the team because what did they say after they signed? I wanted to be back in Buffalo. And so I don't know if you want to go so far as to say it was a hometown discount, but they admittedly took less to come back to the Bills. That's because you've built a winning organization here in 3-4 years' time. So now you've got an attractive place where players want to play, want to be, have fun coming to work every day. you say, well, where does that make a difference? I think it makes a difference in the win-loss column, but I think it also makes a difference in being able to keep a roster together that you're happy with. And I think it was instrumental in helping Brandon Beane and some of the contract negotiators like Jim Overdorf and Kevin Meegang to get some of these deals done at what looks like, at least on the surface, a relatively fiscally responsible long-term contract for both Williams and for Feliciano to get him back in the fold.
Right. Yeah, they continue, and I think the hard part of it, and we've seen other teams do it. The Rams did it. Sean McVay comes in, boom, they're in the Super Bowl. Other teams get immediate benefit out of some changes that they make, and but maintaining it has been the crucial element that's been different, and hopefully is different for this club, because you see teams like Pittsburgh and Baltimore who are constantly at the top of the conference. New England constantly at the top of the conference up until this last year. There are teams that seem to get it and stay there. Yeah. Seattle Seahawks, a great example. They've been good at that. Of course, they've got Russell Wilson, but along with Pete Carroll. Something happens, and we can ask Bill Polian about it, see what he says when he comes on the show after in the third hour. But what is it, and how many things have to align for you to be able to maintain after you get a really good year and you hit it out of the park? I mean, look at the Chicago Bears. They had it, and they lost it. They can't get it back.
Which is
Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah. They had it, and they lost it, and they can't get it back.
And that's what Brandon Beane subscribes to, year-over-year competitiveness, being a perennial playoff contender, right, championship contender, et cetera. And hopefully they can sustain what they've built here going forward. And I think by keeping a lot of the pieces in the same places, they give themselves a very good chance to do that. We need to take a break, but when we come back, your comments on the tweet sheet about what you think are the most underrated parts of the roster build by Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. More of your comments are up next here on One Bills Live, presented by Kaleida Health. It's Buffalo Bills Radio. Some more NFL news and notes. Deshaun Watson's attorney has now issued a press release with what he says are 18 massage therapists who support Watson. There are samples out there in cyberspace if you care to read them. But this is obviously Watson's camp trying to refute the lawsuits filed by, I think it's 19 total women now, by using people from the same profession to say he was fine with me. I don't know that. How does that erase what these women? I don't know. Man. I don't know about that as a defense. Is that I'm no attorney, but
makes me want to wash my hands again.
Yeah, I don't know if that's holding much water for me.
I get it. I get the strategy. It undermines the credibility of the other 19 or whatever.
Does it though?
Why if they're going to say he does it all the time, or if it's a serial thing? Well, if he does it all the time, or if he does whatever? If you're accusing him, he must do it with everybody. Well, he doesn't. So, what are you talking about? So it's that kind of strategy. But the whole thing is a mess.
It's not good.
And you know what? And I understand it's a profession that you kind of have to kind of sign up for. You got to know what you're signing up for. But these lawyers, I mean, how do you keep your integrity and your credibility when you have to defend either side of this? I mean, it's just a sordid affair, And both those guys are coming off like just barely below. Yeah, they're below ambulance chasers.
I just had the thing that doesn't give me a good feeling is just knowing this is probably going to get worse before we get to a point where it's resolved. And
here's the thing.
It's so bad.
It's so bad because the NFL gets so much attention. Its players and its stars get so much attention. When something of this magnitude and importance happens, whether it's ugly or not, guys like you, we're subjected to it. We've got to follow. It's like job descriptions.
Got to
like,
address it.
And it's like, it is not the fun part of what we do.
Yeah.
We will. Yuck.
Yeah, we'll address it more when we get USA Today NFL columnist Jared Bell on with us, because this is very quickly, for people like Jared Bell, taking center stage on the NFL news landscape for national guys like him. There is some positive news on the player front. Seattle Seahawks giving wide receiver Tyler Lockett 4-year deal, Steve, worth just over $69 million on an extension, including $37 million guaranteed. That's a little over $17 a year, about $17.3 a year. So, and Lockett's been a producer. I don't think there's any question about that. Him and DK Metcalf have been the two go-to guys up there in their passing game. So, good for him. We'll have to see where, he comes down in the pecking order of top-paid wide receivers. I got to believe that puts him in the top. Maybe top 10. I'll have to look. Maybe top 10. And then there are important pro days going on at a couple of SEC schools, both Florida and LSU, holding their pro days today. The top 3 receivers from LSU's program, including Jamar Chase, they all ran 4.38 today. All of them over 6 foot. All of them about 210, 215 at least, if not more. All of them run 4.38. Must be nice when you've got a recruiting base like that.
Is it it's unbelievable.
All 3 of them. It's like most schools,
it's
even a lot of SEC schools, Steve, they've got 1 or 2 guys with draftable grades.
Right.
Well, this guy's our cream of the crop here. He runs a 4.35, and he's blah, 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 jumps through the roof, this, that, and the other. And we got this other guy. He'll be a day 3 pick. We're excited about him, too.
Right.
They got 3 guys clocking in at 4.38.
Right now, you're looking at Ed Orgeron. You're going, Ed,
how the hell did you?
Why aren't you holding the trophy?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
At Florida, obviously the main attraction there, the tight end Kyle Pitts, who many feel could be off the board in the top 5 selections, even if the first 4 selections are quarterbacks. He is that gifted. This is a physical freak for sure. Supposedly ran, there's no official time yet, but he ran in the 4.4s on both of his 40 times at his pro day today.
Also, not to forget, Notre Dame's having their pro day.
Yes, they are.
So,
yes, they are, and that's where they've got that linebacker that I've got a man crush on, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who is probably coming off the board in the first 15 picks. So we shall see as the pro day circuit rolls on, and it carries far more importance, Steve, than it has in recent years since there was no combine, as you know. This is the only and probably the last face-to-face opportunities for NFL clubs with their scouts or their coaches or their coordinators or their GMs to get up close and personal with these college players before the draft. We have to take a break, but when we return, it is USA Today NFL columnist Jared Bell joining us. He'll talk to us about some of the most recent NFL developments, where the NFL offseason programs for the 32 teams is headed, with the negotiations between the league and the Players Association, among other topics, including how he thinks the Bills did in this free agency period. Jared Bell next, here on One Bills Live, presented by Kaleida Health. It's Buffalo Bills Radio.
Buffalo Bills Radio Network. Sports Update.
Your sports update from One Bills Drive. The Bills now have 2 signings in the last 2 days in free agency. Yesterday was offensive tackle Bobby Hart signing a 1-year deal, the former starter from Cincinnati. Today, it's linebacker Tyrell Adams, who was a starter in Houston last season. Commencing with the upcoming 2021 campaign, the NFL expanding its regular season to 17 games. NFL owners voted in approval of the change yesterday at the annual league meeting. Each club will now take part in an additional AFC versus NFC game based on division standings from the prior season, a rotation with home games starting with the AFC hosting in 2021. This means the Bills will host Washington in their additional game this fall. Preseason schedule, now just 3 games per team. Also, each team will play in at least 1 international game once every 8 years per the new enhanced schedule beginning in 2022. NFL's international expansion plans, a significant part of Tuesday's league meetings, and games appear to be coming to Germany and South America. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell mentioned both of those locations on a conference call yesterday. The most likely South American country to host an NFL game would be Brazil. NFL making plans to open its stadiums to full capacity for this coming season. Speaking to reporters Tuesday, Goodell said, quote, "All of us in the NFL want to see every one of our fans back. Football is simply not the same without fans, and we expect to have full stadiums in the upcoming season," end quote. And the Sabres finish off their two-game set with the Flyers tonight at KeyBank Center. Flyers won Monday night's game 4-3 in overtime. Dylan Cousins remains day-to-day with an upper body injury. Face-off set for 7:30 p.m. That is your sports update from One Bills Drive. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker here for hour number 2 of a Wednesday edition of One Bills Live. And joining us on the line right now is USA Today NFL columnist Jarrett Bell. And Jarrett, thanks for giving us some time here. Some NFL meetings are wrapping up, and we know you had an ear to the ground on all of the goings-on there. First of all, how you doing? You and your family doing well here? We're trying to climb out of this pandemic. You guys all right?
Yeah, everything is cool, man. Praise God for that. It has definitely been an ordeal for all of us, one way or another. It's hard to believe that it's been like a year since, the pandemic really struck. So gives you a lot to be thankful for and a lot to reflect about.
Yeah,
so, hey, my last COVID shot, the test actually was in Buffalo. Oh, when I came for the Ravens-Bills playoff game. He had to get cleared before in. So I got
tested last week. She says, "Have you ever done this before?" And I said, "Yeah, about 9 gazillion times." So go ahead, right? So, yeah, I'm glad that's kind of getting behind us. But talk about now as the league starts to grind forward. 17 games. Some other thing, the off season's coming up. What do you think? And the league is now, the owners are meeting about their issues, and I heard as well they're having conversations with the players' union about what this off season is going to look like. What do you think the first story is, or the first change, or the first news we're going to hear out of all of this is going to be?
Yeah, well, on top of yesterday, and since we were just talking about the pandemic, I think it's it's appropriate to say that Goodell's statement about having full stadiums this year is significant, because at least it's telling you on the record what they're expecting to do after last year. And I think the NFL draft, the fact that the league announced last week that it's going to have the draft in Cleveland, it's going to expect tens of thousands of fans, no exact number yet, but the fact that they are looking to stage a large outdoor event was kind of the telltale sign that they wanted to go forward when you got to the regular season in terms of having the stadiums full. So Goodell reiterated that yesterday. As far as the off season, that's the next shoe to drop, really. And so the league and the union agreed that they're going to open OTAs, the first phase, on April 19th. Now, after that, there's still a question, and you know how it is for veteran players. The OTAs are voluntary, but then again, if you're trying to make a team, it may not be voluntary. So there's always that. But mandatory mini camps, how much time they will actually spend on the field in OTAs, and oh, by the way, how much players will be required to participate in Zoom meetings at sign of the times, right? Well, that's one of the things that they're going to try to iron out as they continue to discuss this over the next 10 days or so.
So, Jarrett, I mean, we know where the players' union stands on that. They'd prefer to do as much virtual as possible. That much is known. I would have to imagine that coaches would like to get at least somewhere close to where they used to be with the off-season programs to feel as prepared as possible for a season. But knowing, you have connections with ownership, where does ownership stand on that? Because that really doesn't impact their bottom line per se. And after last year going fully virtual and the season kind of going off with just a few hiccups concerning COVID, I'm curious if the owners are going to really stump for the coaches to get players back in the building and more importantly, back on the field for things like OTA practices and a June minicamp.
Yeah, great points for sure. And I think going back to the Super Bowl and when Roger Goodell had his press conference a few days before the game, I mean, he talked about the desire to get back to off seasons as we know them. So I think that kind of represents where the owners stand on this philosophically. But just the fact that they've been talking about it, and you know what? It's in the CBA. If the NFL wanted to tomorrow say this is what we're going to do, they can do it per the terms of the CBA. But the NFL in recent years really has tried to cooperate with the union or try to involve the union in some of these decisions. And I think that's been a good thing just in terms of the collaboration that they've had on some of these things. And maybe that's one reason why we got the CBA done last year without a lockout. But point being, they've done a lot of these things, and we saw it last year during the pandemic when they did the mini CBA within the pandemic, that they're working with the union on this. And you mentioned the union's position. I think the union's position really is like, let's just have no off season, right? But that's not realistic. And so you try to find a happy medium. I was talking to one NFL coach recently, and he told me that if it was up to him, he wouldn't really sweat having the OTAs as we've known them in terms of all of the workouts. Let guys have the building available and open. They can come in and work out, because for the players, a lot of times when they're not at the facilities, they're working out and they're paying trainers in Arizona and Florida and wherever they go. So there is a benefit to players, especially younger players who don't have all the finances that some of the established veterans to have a place to come and be able to work out and get a meal, that sort of thing. So I think there's some sentiment around the league. Yes, we want to have our facilities open for players to work out. Now, how much you do on the field, I think that's really the crux, because another thing that happens every offseason, somebody gets hurt in OTAs, and it's a real serious season-ending injury. I mean, we've seen that. I'm not saying it happens with every team and so many players, but that's one of the storylines that pops up from time to time during these OTAs, because you're on the field, you're competing, and you're playing a physical sport, and injuries happen. So I think that's the big fear, and one of the reasons why a GM, talking about someone else I spoke to recently, told me he's not really on board with having OTAs as extensive as they've had them in the past. So I think these are some of the issues that are on the table being discussed, and it may be a situation where we don't see as many OTA practices as we've had. But again, you can find a range of opinions on that, and you always have been, because you be mindful that some teams have been fined over the years for doing too much in OTA. So they've got to come to some kind of agreement here in the coming days for how they proceed.
There's an enormous gray area, and now you've got an experiment, let's call it, on the other end of it, where last season they couldn't do any of that stuff, and the season went off pretty well. I mean, the football was right. The football was great, and although I think some of the officiating and the way they did things and the shortcuts they took to officiating kind of smoothed the way for the games not to be herky-jerky. Like, they weren't calling holding, and they spotted the ball on the yard line almost all the time. They didn't kind of go the 33. Yeah, they were eyeballing it a lot of times. But nevertheless, the games flowed, and the players played extremely well. Certainly defenses took a while to acclimate, but there's a lot of evidence that says you don't need to see these guys until July, but to put on a really good league in the fall. On the other hand, if I'm owning the team and I'm paying a guys 8 figures, they can show up to work for me whenever I say. I mean, if I'm paying you $10 million, yeah, you're going to show up to work Monday through Friday in March, April, and May, because I'm paying you $10 million for the privilege. So there's a little bit of that going on as well. But the football end of it, I don't know that they have an excuse anymore to say we got to have you in here.
Yeah, a great point, Steve, because that's really the message that J.C. Tretter, the Cleveland Browns center, who is the president of the NFLPA, that's kind of been the basis of his argument, that, hey, we've shown that you can still have a good product. Hey, and I go back far enough in this in this industry, Steve. I started in the 80s.
Right, me too. Yeah,
you didn't see players had off-season jobs.
115 guys in training camp. Yeah, 2-a-days for 3 weeks. Yeah.
But the guys would come in, I think, for one mini camp, but they would also be around during the off season for the scenario I described earlier, where they would be able to come in and work out at the facility, and then they go work their job somewhere. So I think those are some of the realities of what can happen. But here's the thing. The reason why I think they will definitely have some form of it, it's the younger developmental players. So the veteran players, and quarterbacks are a separate category because they're running the offense and they do so much in terms of formulating, the strategies and how you implement that. But you think about the younger guys who are, 1, 2, 3 years in the league, and they're trying to, stick on the roster because we see so much turnover in the roster anyway from year to year. Maybe 30% of the roster is changed at the bottom of the roster. Well, those guys really need to work in the offseason. And even especially like the rookies coming in and learning new techniques and trying to, acclimate themselves to the NFL level. So there is value there for players and coaches. But I think you separate it when you start talking about established players who don't need it. Now, to your point about paying a guy $10 million, I get that. But I think really there's got to be something in there for recovery time. There's got to be besides just the 6 weeks in February.
My thought was this: if you got teams that do demand, it would be a free agent enticement. Say, for instance, a Buffalo team always gives their guys 6 months with no touch. You're out. Whereas somebody like in New England or Miami, wherever, they got you in the building. You're there every day in the off season. So if you're a free agent, you're thinking, man, I want 6 months of free time. And it will be part of your program to entice players with free time in the off season and maybe a Zoom meeting once a week kind of thing. So I thought it would be one more way in a league where every team is kind of the same for these teams to differentiate themselves and maybe gain an advantage in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I had one coach put that to me almost exactly like that. You probably were talking to him because he said, hey, people like our program because of the way that we run our off season. And so, that's a real significant thing for players. But again, I just reiterate, there's just a difference between established players and younger players in terms of what the need is for off season work.
Late last week, Jarrett, and we're talking to Jarrett Bell, NFL columnist for USA Today. Late last week, obviously, the 49ers made seismic waves in the draft with the move from 12 up to 3. And I don't know, Steve and I were talking about it late last week saying, man, they gave up a lot to go up 9 spots. And it harkened us back to the move that Brandon Beane made in the 2018 draft. He went from 12 to 7, which, granted, isn't 3. It's not the top 5, but he only gave up his pick at 12, a couple of 2s, and I think a 4. Didn't give up any additional 1s, and here are the 49ers giving up 2 more 1s on top of their pick at 12 to go up 9 spots. What in the world has happened to the value of the top 12 picks in the draft? Because it just seemed like a king's ransom to get up there.
Yeah, and, you think back to, I think the RG3 deal that Washington made was, multiple number 1 picks. I mean, that is the going rate sometimes, right? And this year it was definitely the going rate because everybody thinks that this crop of quarterbacks is so special that you'll have 5 of them in the top 10 picks, say. And you know how it is, man. We'll come back here in 5 years, maybe even 3 years, and say, whoa, what were they thinking? Because it's such a crapshoot. They always talk about the draft being a crapshoot, but especially when you talk about quarterbacks and you talk about what you give up, as you pointed to get into these positions. So you think about the Rams a few years ago moving up, giving up a bunch of picks to get Jared Goff, right? And then the second pick was Carson Wentz. And Dak Prescott, by the way, was drafted in the 4th round that year.
Right.
And Prescott's got the $40 million deal now. And Goff and Wentz were both traded this offseason. I mean, it's crazy. And I'm not even saying that Goff and Wentz are busts at this point, but they have been traded. So when you talk about building your franchise around somebody that you've invested so heavily into, it's phenomenal when you think of that. And then you can go to the situation with Mitch Trubisky, because the 49ers, and this is John Lynch, when he first started on the job, they swung that trade with Chicago to allow the Bears to move one spot to get Mitch Trubisky, and that was the year Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes, and look at what's all happened there.
So let's take that a step further, Jarrett, because they move up from 12 to 3, and there's this undercurrent of, it's going to be Mac Jones. He's a fit for Kyle Shanahan offense. And Steve and I are looking at each other going, Mac Jones? This guy they're talking about him being available at the 15th pick for New England, and now he's in the top 3? Like, what the hell happened here? You're not moving up there to get a guy with no elite physical traits, are you? You're going to get Justin Fields or Trey Lance. You're looking for an athletic phenom at 3, aren't you?
I think so, too. And the fact that the 49ers went to go to Alabama's pro day the next day after they had the press conference, right? Yeah, right. We're in the smokescreen season, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So I'm not buying that one. And I'm with you, Chris. It's got to be Fields when you talk about what you're moving up to try to get, or even Trey Lance if you like him so much better, because – it just wouldn't make sense to move that high and give up that much for Mac Jones. And Mac Jones might be another Matt Ryan type of guy for Kyle Shanahan, right? But he is definitely in that mode versus, some of the other quarterbacks that we've seen come along. So, smoke screen season. And the one thing that Kyle Shanahan said the other day on the press conference, I was on that Zoom call too, and he talked about the fact that they are going to have another opportunity at Justin Fields to see him in person.
Yeah, he's going to throw a second time, right?
Yeah, exactly. So in terms of the timing for when they decided to go see Mac versus Justin, I think that was part of it as well. But nothing like a good smoke screen.
Well, and Shanahan also said that, Jimmy Garoppolo wasn't all that happy with that trade up because he can see the writing on the wall just like the three of us can. How do you think that goes down? And because Garoppolo's contract is not a safety net in any way, shape, or form for him.
Yeah, no. And you know what? Here's the thing. I started thinking about that because there's still a couple more years for Garoppolo on the contract. I think it's 2. It might be 3. So in salary cap, parlance, if you will, they can work with that. And remember, this cap is going up a lot more, okay, over the next 3 years or so. So they can stomach it from that standpoint for obviously this year, and then maybe even next year in terms of if you don't have the young guy ready at that point. But it is interesting because if you get the young guy and he turns out to be a great player, then you're going to save. So I see the decision really on Garoppolo coming down in a couple years to tell you the truth. I think they've got this year and next year to really deal with that contract, and then after that they'll have a little amount of time and how much cap dollars they would have to eat if they get let go of Jimmy Garoppolo. But in the meantime, if the cap is going up and you got a young quarterback playing on a rookie contract, that's going to give you a benefit, inherently just because of that, then you can do this. But in terms of Garoppolo and, his reaction to the deal, I mean, you can't blame him just because he's a competitor. He's playing, and he's played well when he's been healthy, but we all know. And even before he got there, you think about that. That was kind of the big question was, is he going to be healthy reliably, right? And so you look at Tom Brady and all the greatness that he's had over the years, and he had that 1 year where he got his, injured his knee and missed most of the year. But otherwise, his durability has been just, off the chart. But that's so rare, especially for that position.
Last one from
your guy in Buffalo has got the makings of holding up too, but not to jinx him or anything like that. But it's still, sometimes you can just be the biggest stud and just playing that position, there's this inherent risk. But in San Francisco's case, I think, if you're going to make the move now, you still have time. You can, work that, deal with Garoppolo's contract and have a couple years to be able to do it.
Last one from me, Jared. I know you recently had a piece on the Saints and where they go at quarterback going forward. Obviously, they have Hill and Winston on the roster, but no Drew Brees is going to change the complexion of that entire division, let alone the Saints. The Bills have the Saints on the schedule this year, so that's why I'm asking this one. You said it's going to test the Saints' creative mojo. Exactly what do you mean by that?
Because, just what you said about Drew Brees, it has been Drew Brees, Sean Payton, and that system in place for so long, right? We're talking 15 years. And so now, and even though Payton has done things like with Taysom Hill, who I think is just this phenomenal talent, as we all probably do, the way that they've been able to use him, they've shown a great deal of creativity just to get him in the flow and get impact for him. And so that has been that. But now, I think even if you pick Jameis Winston as the starter, well, you're still going to have to do something with Taysom Hill. You can't just let him sit there. If Taysom Hill is the starter, then you're going to have to do more to create your offense around him and his skill set. And so I think it's a real tricky thing, because say Taysom Hill is the guy and you build this offense and then something happens to Taysom Hill and Winston has to play, you may have to, just really, reconfigure your offense around Winston. So it's almost like it's not, one offense and both guys play it the same way. Right. And, when I talked to Sean Payton about it, he pretty much acknowledged that. And he said that, hey, as we build this offense, it will be built, based on the guy who wins the job. And, for their sake, better sooner than later to have a decision on where you're going. But that's the kind of challenge that they have, as opposed to all of these years saying, Drew Brees is our offense and anything we add on top of it is just in addition to what we do as a base offense. So it's going to test them. And then, Pete Carmichael, who for many years was the offensive coordinator. Lombardi, the quarterback's coach, has moved on to the Chargers. So they've got some, some creative things that are going to challenge them.
Well, last one for me. We're kind of about all about the Bills here, and we watch what goes on in the division. What do you think, and what's your first reaction to the way Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots handled their free agency with signing Cam Newton just before it started, and the four main guys, 2 tight ends, 2 wideouts that they brought back, plus all the recent signings from guys who had left New England and now are coming back? What are your thoughts on where the New England Patriots sit after free agency?
Yeah, I mean, they're better. They're going to be, more competitive, I think. But the way I look at it right now, Buffalo is still the team to beat. And that's with all due respect to everything the Patriots have done. Now, we can always look at free agency and say, it's a hit or miss thing with a lot of players. But and it is, because some players have to come from different systems and fit in and all that. But at least the Patriots have more talent than they had, right? So how it all fits, and Belichick can make it all fit. So that remains to be seen. But the one person that they don't have coming back is Tom Brady, right? And so, a lot of this still is on Cam Newton. Now, Cam Newton is going to be surrounded by a better cast. He's got speed at receivers. He's got 2 tight ends. We'll see if the offensive line can be consistent, the defense. So he's got all this stuff around him that's going to be better. And that's for any quarterback anywhere. You want to have a great supporting cast. So now I think so much of this is going to come down to whether or not Cam Newton can be a lot better than he was last year. Because the one thing that I thought about the Patriots last year is that they had 4 or 5 games that they lost that they were in position to win, and they didn't get it done in crunch time. And some of that fell directly on Cam Newton. And those were the games that Tom Brady would have won for, most of them, right? And so I think that just kind of illustrates, the difference between going 13-3 or even 11-5 versus 8-8. Okay, so they're going to need to see more and better from Cam Newton, but at least he has more weapons around him. Now let's see if he can take his game up to another level.
Yeah,
and that's something, it's interesting. You think about Cam Newton, he was an MVP at one point, but he fell off, and now he's trying to get back, if not at MVP level, at least to, dominant quarterback level.
Yeah, it was rough last year. I mean, it wasn't the receivers that made him throw, 59-footers, bouncing him off the ground in front of receivers. He's really got to get back to playmaking status if that offense is going to go anywhere. But we're out of time, Jared. Thanks very much for giving us some of yours. We appreciate it. Always appreciate the expertise and insight.
No, I appreciate you guys. Have a good one. Stay safe.
Yeah, appreciate you too. That's Jared Bell, national columnist for the NFL for USA Today. And we didn't even get into the Deshaun Watson stuff, but you know what? I don't know if that's a thing I want to really dive deep into until there's more clarity on it. And it's troubling. It is troubling stuff. But it's interesting that he thinks a better surrounding cast is going to help Cam Newton. I believe it'll help him.
Sure.
But he's the trigger man. Like, he's got to make it happen. And I can't get those bounce passes out of my head from last season. I don't know how it's suddenly going to flip on its head and be dramatically better. I mean, yes, he will have easier throws to make with the tight ends in the middle of the field. He can throw it there. So that will help him inherently. I mean, just logically thinking.
Right.
But getting it outside the numbers was a major issue for him last. He couldn't do it.
Yeah, the ball does not come out of his hands the way it once did. And I'm with you. He made some bad throws last year, and throws where he was not hurried, throws that you've seen him and tons of other quarterbacks. Just you make it. The ball comes out, and he would release that ball, and it would not come out the way he expected it to come out, and that's troubling.
Well, and I think people have thought of him for so long as this physical Adonis, because he is. I mean, I know you've stood next to him. I've stood on the sidelines like 10 yards away from him. I mean, he looks like he's chiseled out of granite.
And he's
at 6'5", and he has
6'5" plus.
Insane muscle definition for a person with long, muscle fibers. It's not right. And I think he's long been thought of this physical Adonis for so long that I don't know if people have come to the realization that, well, maybe he just can't do it physically anymore, which sounds insane standing there looking at him. But after we saw what we saw last year, I'm wondering. I really am.
I know this.
And he's had multiple surgeries. Let's not forget that. For feet and for shoulders. And it adds up. It has a cumulative effect.
The reality is this. All these guys, it's everybody. The reality is this. When you play in the NFL for a time, any period of time.
10 years for him.
10 years, of course. Guys like Brady and whatever. And all these young guys we're talking about running these 4.3s coming out of college. And listen, Tyreek Hill is not going to run a 4.3 for his entire life. Or 4.2. Whatever. When he's 10 years into his career, he'll be fast, but he's not going to be 4.2 fast.
There'll be miles on the tires.
That's just the way it works because the accumulation of physical punishment just doesn't go away.
Yeah. I mean, Edelman's another example. That guy's he's running bone on one of his knees. That doesn't work at age 35.
It hurts. The game hurts, and these guys deal with it. Cam Newton, and you think about the shots he took and the physicality he played with. As big and as strong and as tough as he is, it hurts, man. And, you don't work the same way when you're 35 as you did when you were 25. So, to see Cam Newton in the shape that he is, I mean, it doesn't surprise you, but he's one of the opponents that Father Time is kind of getting the best of.
Break time for us. When we come back, we'll get your thoughts on the tweet sheet as we've been talking today about the most underrated moves made by Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott in this roster build. We got some good answers on the tweet sheet. We'll get to those when we return. Here on One Bills Live, presented by Kaleida Health, it's Buffalo Bills Radio. Back at One Bills Live, Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. Some more NFL news coming down. NFL Network's Tom Pelissero tweeting that the NFL just sent a memo to clubs saying they should prepare to conduct meetings virtually when the offseason program begins April 19th, but don't anticipate another all-virtual workout program like 2020, according to sources. Translation, get ready to see players on the field this spring. The memo also says teams should procure sufficient COVID testing supplies before April 19th, while also saying protocols will be amended in the coming months to eliminate a number of significant restrictions for vaccinated individuals, including daily testing. Now, as we know, Steve, vaccines have not been mandated by the league, but they will certainly carry a bunch of incentives because in the memo it also said it is also anticipated that clubs that achieve a certain rate of vaccination among its tiered staff and players may be permitted to relax restrictions that apply to meetings, mealtime, and the use of locker rooms.
Yeah.
So they're
That's
not going to
huge.
tell people what to do, but you'll be in better shape if you do.
If everybody gets vaccinated, you won't have any COVID restrictions in your building. That's incentive enough. But I was telling you as we were off to break, this April 19th, you think about why they do, why April? Why not, June or July? Why not leave it away? Here's why. April 19th, 2 weeks before, or 10 days before the draft. What they do is they go out, they send their scouts out, their GMs, their coaching staff out, and they look at all these pro days. They look at this stuff. They start scouting. They're looking at film. They're watching these guys play who are going to be in the draft. And then they say, okay, we got all these guys. These guys look pretty good. What about let's go? You know what? Right before the draft, let's get one good look at our players to remember what we have right now. That's what this April 19th thing is. Now, the meetings are all going to be virtual, but they're also still discussing what they can do on the field. In years past, when it was quote-unquote normal, they'd be on the field running around. It wasn't that way last year, and this year it looks like it's going to be meetings are going to be virtual. Yeah. And they're still talking about
phase one.
They may get a chance to get on the field and do some,
I think that's May.
They may be able to do some gym classes or something, like nothing. But in years past, that's what that was all about. They want to get one last look at who they've got before they hit the draft. They've got all this stuff, the haze in the barn with the college player evaluations. Now they come back, they get one last look at their guys to refresh their roster and see what they got, even the new guys especially. Yeah. And then they go to the draft saying, okay, here's what we're looking at. And that's why this happens in April.
The other interesting thing is, with no combine, there's no wholesale medical examination of the balance of players, upwards of 300, for the teams to make use of and file away. And they've had to do a lot of that legwork at pro days and such, or they've pooled resources in certain teams that have been able to do medical evaluations on certain players. They send them to the other clubs. There have been some arrangements made. But now, and again, this is Tom Pelissero reporting this, we know in April they usually have those medical rechecks in Indianapolis. So players at the Combine, they got red flagged for something. They will circle back, bring them back to Indianapolis in April for a medical recheck. They are conducting a medical recheck with about 150 NFL draft prospects who will be in Indianapolis next weekend for in-person medical evals, a shorter list than normally examined at the Combine, but it's expected to include all projected round 1 to round 3 picks, plus other flagged individuals that happen during pro day visits. Yeah. So they're doing whatever they can to cover as many bases as they can before the draft, despite the pandemic. So interesting.
Yeah. And because think about it, there's no other reason for them to have an April get-together except to evaluate the guys they've got before they draft new ones. And the Bills signed their guy Tyrell Adams, and so doing that, there's just nothing. Yeah, Tyrell Adams. Some of these guys aren't even going to make it to camp. They're just not. They're going to run out. They're going to see if they can at the bottom of the roster the new signs. They're like, I like this guy even better. Okay, that guy's gone. You're in, and they go to training camp like that. They'll keep changing the roster even after the draft, signing rookie free agents, all of that stuff. So this, I get it, makes good sense, but in the big scheme of things, I mean, what are you doing? They don't need to talk to these guys. They don't need Josh Allen to come back for a week on April 19th.
Yeah.
They don't need Devin Singletary or Zach Moss to come back for – what are you doing? You know, that's what the union's saying. You don't need these guys. You got May, June, and July before you even think about getting ready for the season. Why you got to have these guys back in 10 – you know what I mean? And so this harkens back to when it was all done with pencils and erasers instead of laser beams and computers. So, you know, the union's got a point when they say, bro, come on.
Break time for us. I promise we'll get to the tweet sheet when we return. Your comments on the most underrated part of the roster build under Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. Got some good responses here. Promise we'll get to them when we return. Here on One Bills Live, presented by Kaleida Health. It's Buffalo Bills Radio. What's the most underrated part of the roster build under Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott? Let us know at One Bills Live on the tweet sheet, which is where we go now. Brought to you by Corrigan Moving Systems, the official equipment moving company of the Buffalo Bills. JT leads us off today. Says nothing. We were underrated and underdogs for a while the last couple of years. That's why we are who we are today, one of the best teams in the NFL. We've got a smart GM, smart head coach, two guys that wanted to build and believe in this franchise, and we have built a culture no other team has. I think there are some healthy cultures elsewhere in the league, but I get what he's saying. I don't know if he understood the question fully. You know, what's the most underrated part of the roster build? And he didn't think there was anything that was underrated. I think there are some parts of this roster build that don't get enough credit. The willingness to trade up time and again to get some player you covet that you believe is sliding. I mean, whether you're talking, listen to this list, Steve, okay, in terms of trade ups.
Okay.
Deion Dawkins, Josh Allen, Tremaine Edmonds, Dawson Knox, Cody Ford.
Did they trade up for Tre'Davious?
No, down.
Okay, down.
Which was before Beane got on board.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
Those are all the trade-ups. I believe that's all of them.
It's an impressive group. I think one of the things about this question, most underrated part of the roster build, it almost comes down to you have to kind of peel away the results of what's really underrated. The underrated part is the discipline they have never to go off course. Mm-hmm. They kicked the tires on everything, but they didn't pay the money for Le'Veon Bell. They didn't pay the money for Antonio Brown. They didn't even offer, right? And
they didn't overpay for J.J. Watt like the Arizona Cardinals
did. Right. They looked into all of those things and didn't pull the trigger. When it's too rich, it's too rich. When it's too much, it's too much. And when they do pull the trigger, they rarely get it wrong. On those trade-ups you just said. They rarely get that wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think the most underrated thing is the thing that we don't talk about too much. It's the discipline they have not to go off course.
Stick to the vision.
How many times? Look at the Jets.
Because it can be tempting. You get hyper-competitive. You see some other team doing something, and then you're tempted to do something.
They're not going to get our guy. We're going to get him.
And you veer off course.
Yeah. You put yourself into problems. J.J. Watt's never going to earn $15 million production-wise.
Yeah.
He's going to earn it because he signed the contract, but he's not going to outplay that contract.
No.
There's no way.
Not at age 32 with his injury history.
There's no way.
Tiffany on the tweet sheet says, in my opinion, adding Trubisky was genius. Not too long ago, he was the second overall selection in the draft. If the Bills can find a way to get his confidence back, they'll have a solid backup option behind Josh and a potential trade asset for a team in need of a quarterback. Now, I don't know that you need to get his confidence back. This guy completed 67% of his passes last season when he was finally healthy again, after a partially torn labrum in 2019 that he played through. 16 touchdowns, 8 picks, and a passer rating of almost 94. And as we said on the show yesterday, Steve, guy went 8 games over 500 in 50 starts for the Bears.
The Bears.
The Bears.
They're the only team in the league who in their history does not have a 4,000-yard thrower. Never. Not one.
So I would agree it's an underrated signing. I just don't know if you need to get his confidence back. I think he had a decent season last year. I really do. I'm
with you. I underrated, I don't know, because it'll only be underrated now if he comes in and knocks it out of the park when you need him to.
Unexpected might be a better description.
Which you hope he never sees the light of day.
I did see a report out there where Trubisky said he would have been interested if the Denver Broncos gave him a call to compete for the starting job, with Drew Lock.
Right.
Vic Fangio's up there. He was in Chicago previously as the DC. Mitchell knows him. He would have been excited to do that. Denver never called.
Okay. There must be something there
Never
we
called.
don't see. There's got to be something there that we don't see.
Look, the guy doesn't have a rocket arm. It's not an elite arm. It's an above-average arm. But I think his physical skill set is more closely aligned with that of Josh Allen, where if, God forbid, he's got to play a couple games, you don't have to revamp your entire offense to fit the backup. He can do most of what Josh does.
Yeah, you may not even have to
not to the same level, but
you may not even have to change your play calls, right? And to Tiffany, use him as a trade asset for another team in need of a quarterback. That's never going to happen. He's got a 1-year deal.
Yeah,
you're not going to get a chance to trade him.
Rusty says the most underrated is their ability to identify and keep the key parts of the core here. White, Dawkins, Milano, Hyde, Poyer, Hughes, and hopefully 17 and 14, while adding role players on short-term deals who often want to stay here and hopefully contribute to continued and long-term success.
That's true.
That's a good summation, I think.
Yeah.
From Rusty.
Getting key players to buy in and not test, and from a lot of them not to test the free agent waters, just signed because they want to be here in Buffalo. That is really underrated. I might agree with this one.
Mm-hmm.
I might agree with this one because that's hard to do when you get a guy that comes up, wanted to play football all his life, all of a sudden he's got a chance like Matt Milano to hit a absolute financial home run. You're talking over the course of a 4-year deal, he signed for what was it? What was an average of his deal?
Who are we talking about?
Yeah, Matt Milano. His average deal with the Bills
was
four for 48?
44.
44. It's $11 million a year. You're talking over the course of that deal, if he'd have hit a home run and signed for 14, you're talking like $12 extra million on that contract if he sees all of it. Now, he might not have with another team, but that's always the case. He might not see it with Buffalo. But be willing to say, no, I'm good because I want to stay here. You can't put a price on it.
Yeah. And you think, because I remember these days, we're not terribly far removed from them, but there was a time here in free agency where the Bills had to throw money at people and grossly overpay just to get them here. I mean, Derek Dockery, $56 million for an average guard, They had to overpay for a ton of guys on the free agent market just to be a competitive team again, but that cost them on the back end because then with some of the young players they had in the pipeline who did look promising, they couldn't hold on to them because they couldn't compete for them financially.
Right.
Pat Williams, perfect example. You spend all this free agent money to stock the roster to get a guy like Takeo Spikes, to get a Sam Adams, to get a player like
Mario Williams.
Well, yeah, later down the line, Mario Williams, right. But then you can't
Antoine Winfield Sr.
But then you can't keep a player like Nate Clemens. You can't keep a player like Pat Williams. You can't hold on to the youth that's going to play for you a lot longer if you can hold on to them. Now you've got a situation here where the roster is so strong, the culture is so good that you have your core players coming back at a little bit less than market value, and you've got your free agent players that you brought in as young vets that are older vets now that want to stay and see the thing through. You can't beat that.
Yeah.
Can't beat that, especially after we bore witness to the other end of the spectrum right here in Buffalo for the better part of 10 or 12 years.
Right.
Break time for us. When we come back, more of your thoughts on the tweet sheet And in about 20 minutes, Hall of Fame General Manager Bill Polian joining us about 20 after the hour, about 20 minutes from now, to talk about Marv Levy's CFL Hall of Fame candidacy among the offseason dealings of the Buffalo Bills and what he thinks of that. We're back in a moment here on One Bills Live, presented by Kaleida Health. It's Buffalo Bills Radio.
Buffalo Bills Radio Network. Sports Update.
Your sports update from One Bills Drive. For the second time in 2 days, the Bills have added a player in free agency. Yesterday it was offensive tackle Bobby Hart, signing a one-year deal, a former starter for the Cincinnati Bengals at right tackle. Today it's linebacker Tyrell Adams, a starter for Houston last season. Commencing with the upcoming 2021 campaign, NFL expanding its regular season to 17 games per team. NFL owners voted in approval to change that on Tuesday at the annual league meetings. Each club now takes part in an additional AFC versus NFC game based on division standings from the prior season. A rotation with home games begins with the AFC hosting in 2021, the NFC in 2022. So the Bills will host Washington this season in their additional game. NFL's international expansion plans, a part of Tuesday's league meetings, and games appear to be coming to Germany and South America. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell mentioned both Germany and South America on a conference call yesterday. The most likely South American destination, Brazil. The NFL making plans to open its stadiums to full capacity for the 2021 season. Speaking to reporters Tuesday, Goodell said, "All of us in the NFL want to see every one of our fans back. Football is simply not the same without fans, and we expect to have full stadiums in the upcoming season." And NFL Network reporter Tom Pelissero reporting that while the first part of NFL offseason programs will be all virtual beginning April 19th, it looks as though there will be players on the field at some point later in the spring as part of NFL offseason programs. We'll await further details. Finally, the Sabres finish off their two-game set with the Flyers tonight at the KeyBank Center. Flyers won 4-3 in overtime on Monday. Dylan Cousins still day-to-day with an upper body injury. Face-off for tonight's game set for 7:30. That is your sports update from One Bills Drive. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you. Hour number 3 of the program. About 15 minutes away from talking with Hall of Fame General Manager Bill Polian, who's going to be joining us at about 13, 15 minutes from now. In the meantime, we're taking your thoughts on the most underrated moves in this roster build by Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. And we go back to the tweet sheet, and there we have Charlie, who says, the underrated part is intelligence. I think we're all aware of the world-class character, work ethic, and dedication on this roster, but all the players I've heard speak in interviews on this show and elsewhere, intellect and eloquence stands out. Passion, a close second. These guys frickin' love football. That's the Bills' DNA, Steve.
Yeah, that's. I don't know, and here's one of the reasons I don't bring it up more than I do, because I don't know the inner workings and I haven't heard of the conversations. Certainly, it's obvious from what we've seen and also what what Charlie there says about the intelligence and the character and all the other stuff. I don't know I know it's there for all these guys. I don't know how many times they've said, this guy we'd love to have, but no. You know what I mean? I don't know how many times they've been tempted to deviate from that, but they don't do it very often if they do. And I certainly don't know which guy they're talking about in that respect. So I would say, yeah, it's very underrated because I don't know how many times that's come into play where they've said no to a guy strictly because of his character or his intellect or any of the other intangible stuff.
I'm reminded of a famous quote by one Bill Parcells, who in his first year coaching the Jets, which I want to say was 97, they were struggling through a 2 or 3 game losing streak, and there were some boneheaded plays being committed in critical moments by players on that roster. And Parcells, in a post-game press conference, goes into this probably 2-minute soliloquy on how important it is to have players who know how to make the right decisions at the critical moments of games. And he said, we continue to have problems in that area. So one of the reporters follows up and says, well, why does that continue to happen? And he says, because you got dumb guys playing in the games. Like, just flat out said it, dumb guys. And you say to yourself, okay, well, where does that really surface? And does it really cost you football games? I will point you back to the Indianapolis Colts playoff game against the Bills. Do you remember when the Bills lined up on 4th down? Everybody knew they were going to call a timeout. They were not running a play. They got Al-Qadim Muhammad to jump off sides. Got a fresh set of downs, put points on the board. What was the final point differential in that game, Steve?
6?
3. It was 27-24.
That's right.
And came down to a Hail Mary at the end.
That's exactly right.
Dumb players, according to Bill Parcells, get you beat.
There you go.
So intelligence does count, and I think it is underrated. So I agree with Charlie. How about that? Garrett says the secondary. We have the best safety duo in Hyde and Poyer. Trey White is a shutdown corner. Whoever plays on the other side is always ready to make a play. If we could just bolster the front four to help them out by creating pressure, we could have a top 3 defense. So he thinks the secondary's underrated. I think the secondary's got its fair share of credit here, don't you?
Yeah, we talked about it. I thought
we talk about him a lot. We pump him up.
I thought one of the most underrated moves that they made, personnel-wise, was in the early going when they signed Poyer and Hyde early, and they signed to long-term deals, and it was like, and I mentioned it was a yawner. Like, who are these guys? Okay, fine, safeties. They're not locked down corners. Why? And it was a defensive coach who did it. So I'm like, okay, I kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt. I was like, okay,
and let's not forget, Coach McDermott was a safety once himself.
Right.
So you'd like to think he could identify guys that would fit there in his defense.
And that's it. He's a defensive coordinator in the league. That's how he became a head coach. He was a quality defensive coordinator. He thinks those guys are pretty important. I was like, okay, good. Prove it to me. And they did. Yep. Those guys turned into 2 pillars of the defense. Those guys are foundational. And so that I agree. I think those guys are. We've given those guys a lot of credit, and continue to. They deserve it.
Those guys are aces.
Yeah.
From Mark, cap management, value signings with the ability to get out of the contract down the road if necessary. Now, I will say there's a lot to be said for fiscal responsibility, and we know that is one of the tenets of Brandon Beane's construction project here, to remain cap strong, as he puts it.
Right.
And they had to bite the bullet in 2018 and clean up the cap mess from the previous regime. They bit the bullet that 1 year and then have made no bones about never going back to that universe again.
Yeah, and
they hedged a little bit this year.
Well, yeah, but that
because
was
of the restrictive cap.
Because the cap dropped and it was $30 million below where they thought it was going to be, or $22.5 million below where they thought it was going to be. That's a huge difference. So everybody made some concessions this year under the constraints, but it's true. I think good teams manage the cap better than bad teams, and they do it year after year after year after year. Certainly, we see other teams around the league. For instance, the LA Rams. Their position is pay the guys and push it down the road.
Yeah, we'll figure it out later.
Steelers
did the same thing.
We'll deal with it later. They had the Steelers $138 or $140 million cap last year, or payroll last year. That's amazing. I don't even know that would have been legal under a regular cap. You know what I'm saying?
Well, you got the Saints signing guys with fictitious years at the end of their contract. They're all voidable. They're essentially 1-year deals with 4 years of voidable years on the back end, so they can amortize the bonus money.
What they do is they give them everything up front on a 5-year deal for the same money they were going to get for this 1 year.
Yeah, just to spread the money.
Out.
Steve, you'll enjoy this. This doesn't have anything to do with our Twitter question, but it is a response that you will enjoy from Troy regarding Steve's Easy Pass incident. Hey, guys, A couple of years ago, I took my kids out for breakfast, and the bill came to $24. The server accidentally put in $2,400. Took a week to get those funds back. $2,400 for pancakes and bacon. That wasn't even his fault.
Yeah, that's true.
The server runs up $2,400 on the card.
You got to read the ticket when he brings it back, though. I mean,
this is true.
That
is very true.
His mistake was exactly the same as mine.
He signed off on it.
Yeah, proofread, right? So I get it.
That's a lot of money for pancakes and bacon.
It's a big tab.
He could eat free at that place for probably 4 years. 24
Until the next day he comes back and says, we don't know you.
Yeah. That was funny.
Yeah.
All right, break time for us. When we return, it is the Hall of Fame general manager joining us, one Bill Polian, Bills Wall of Famer. Back with us when we return here on One Bills Live, presented by Kaleida Health. It's Buffalo Bills Radio. Welcome back to One Bills Live. Chris Brown, Steve Tasker with you here, hour number 3 of the show. And joining us now is a Bills Wall of Famer, a Pro Football Hall of Fame Hall of Famer. It is the former GM of the Bills and a couple of other teams by the name of the Carolina Panthers and Indianapolis Colts in the NFL ranks. He is a competition committee veteran. Guy lived on the competition committee, Steve. Yeah. It is one Bill Polian joining us here on the show. And, Bill, I know we were talking to you during the break, so we're glad you and your family are well during the pandemic. First things first, one of the main reasons we've got you on the show is one of your former co-workers in a multitude of places, including Montreal, one Marv Levy, Hall of Famer himself, is up for candidacy for the CFL Hall of Fame. And I guess that's coming down next week. Obviously, you spent a good deal of time with him up there. I think you guys won a couple of Grey Cups. What do you feel should put him firmly in the running for Hall of Fame credentials up there north of the border?
Well, first of all, he's my mentor. I mean, he's the guy that created me. There would be no Bill Polian in pro football if it weren't for Marv Levy. But above and beyond that, he went to 3 Grey Cups in 5 years as coach of the Alouettes. Resuscitated a franchise that had been down. And by any measure, people are shocked when we talk about this as GM. I'm amazed he wasn't in the CFL Hall of Fame sooner. Well, he wasn't. And so it's time to rectify that. But I think more important than that, when he came to Buffalo, we began to build a fan base in Canada. And by the time Steve finished playing, 20% of our fan base was from Southern Ontario.
Right.
And when you think of the effect Marv had on those people in Canada and all of the tremendous publicity and positive publicity that he always generated for the Alouettes and for the CFL, he really did more as coach of the Bills to publicize and make the CFL a viable league in people's minds than he really ever did as coach of the Alouettes. So the CFL has benefited all these years because everyone always identifies him as a big success in the CFL. So that, to me, is reason alone for him to be in. Aside from that stellar record, he's done much more for the CFL than it ever did for him. And it's time for him to be honored for all the great contributions he's made both to that league and to ours.
I've also said this, and I said it when he went in the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, and also on the Wall of Fame whenever I get asked about him. And you alluded to it. He was your mentor, and I continue to think about things that I learned from him. And if there's any Hall of Fame that Marv is up for, he should be in. And I said, if there was a Hall of Fame for the human race, Marv would be in the running for that, right? So I agree with you 100%. I mean, his qualifications is a two-time head coach. Plus, I think not only did he do it here in Buffalo, but also in Montreal. Taking a team from where it was when they took over and to where it got to, that's the real, that's where the rubber meets the road. And his credentials in that arena are impeccable.
Well, not only that, he brings such class to any organization he's associated with. And that's far and away, as Steve, you alluded to it, anyone who he's touched throughout the years in his coaching profession always admires him. Most of us can quote him chapter and verse so much later in our lives, right, because we've never forgotten the lessons that he's taught us. He's by far the greatest teacher I've ever been around. He's affected lives positively wherever he's been. And if that isn't a qualification for the Hall of Fame, I don't know what is.
Certainly a qualification for the Human Hall of Fame. You got to get working on that, Steve.
Yeah, right.
So, Bill, you always refer to him as a mentor, but I'm curious, what do you feel are the pillars of the mentor-mentee relationship that you took from Marv? If there are a couple of high points that come to the forefront of your brain when you think about the number one or two things that stick with you from your time with Marv that you feel have benefited you time and again?
It's hard to enumerate them because, as I've always said, and I said in my Hall of Fame acceptance speech, that all of what I know about pro football and most of what I know about life, worth knowing, I learned from Marv Levy. So there's a great deal of it. Having said that, I think the accent on character, that everybody in the organization needs to have the right character and the right set of values. And then his ability to reach people via good example, positive teaching, the positive reinforcement on a continual basis, and his positive outlook on life. There's always tomorrow. Things are going to look better. Keep working at it. Keep grinding. All of those things are part and parcel of who he is and what he made us into. So those would be the high spots.
We had as a guest on the show a few weeks ago, Tony Dungy, who I know that you also have a great deal of respect for and worked with. And I asked him a question I'm going to ask you now. He was a head coach, you were general manager, and also you were general manager for Marv as well. How important is it to have, and what kind of relationship is necessary to being a successful GM head coach combination in the National Football League, and has it changed?
No, it hasn't changed one iota. Not since I became the GM in Buffalo in '86 through today. It's still the same process. Winning, as Marv used to say, winning's simple, but it isn't easy. And you have to have good players, and you have to coach them well. The GM has to find the player, and the scouting staff has to find the players, and the coaches have to coach them well. And both the GM and the head coach have to be on the same page. I'll tell you a great story, and every word of this is true. It's almost like I remember it verbatim as though it was yesterday, not however long ago it was, 20 years or so. I was talking with Tony about joining the Colts just after he'd been let go by Tampa Bay. And and we had a long conversation. He said it's around 8 hours. To me, it seemed less, but when you're talking ball, what the heck, right? But anyway, I said to him, take me from day one of training camp through the Super Bowl. How are you going to prepare the team? What do you think the emphasis ought to be, and so forth and so on? Very detailed question. And he began to answer, and about 3 paragraphs in, he stopped and he said, did I say something funny? And I said, no, why? And he said, well, you're smiling and nodding your head. I said, oh, I apologize. I've heard this all before verbatim from Coach Levy. It's exactly the same approach.
Right.
They're 2 peas in the same pot.
Yeah.
And so far as I know, and so far as any of us can tell, other than Tony Marv trying to recruit Tony to play for the Alouettes is the only connection they've ever had.
Right.
But they're identical in terms of their approach.
Well, go ahead.
Sorry, we're talking with six-time NFL Executive of the Year, Bill Polian. And, Bill, with that in mind, I know a lot of people have already said here in Buffalo that this combination of Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott is probably the closest thing to a general manager and a head coach being in lockstep since you and Marv were running things here in Buffalo. Viewing it from afar, of course, what are the most appealing things that you see about this current combination that Buffalo has working for them?
Well, Brandon's a lot smarter than I was, but other than that, I think that's absolutely correct. First of all, they share a common view of how the team should be built and how it should play and how it should look and what kind of people they want on the team. They never stray from that blueprint. Sean, I said this after his first year, I didn't want to put, a lot of pressure on him, but he reminded me so much of Marv that it was uncanny. His approach to things, the way he outlines things, the way he talks to the press, the way he talks to the team, the way he conducts himself on game day, the way he manages the game on game day. It's all very familiar to me. And in talking with Brandon and getting to know him, their approach is very, very similar to ours, very similar, right down to the kind of people that they want on the team. When I see them make a move, I just nod my head and say, okay, I understand why they're doing that. Whether it's an acquisition or letting somebody go, it's all a function of staying with the blueprint, which is based entirely on, people of character who want to work hard, who want to win, who believe in team, and who play smart. And that's the kind of football team they have. And if you don't have that alignment of philosophy between the GM and the head coach, it's very hard to succeed.
Well, we've heard also about you've been a part of the competition committee at length and for many years, and have been with different organizations and watched the league, and we've heard you say just in the last couple of minutes how many things are similar today that they were 30 years ago when the Bills were doing their thing in the 90s. What has changed for you? What's the biggest change in the league now? I know it changes a little bit every year, so it more evolves rather than changes. But as you look at it now in 2021, just after a pandemic year, what do you think is the big change now that maybe forges a change and a transformation in the future?
Well, the big change came in 93 with free agency, because it allowed much more player movement than we had in the past. When you came in at 21 or 22, however old you were at the time, you grew up with us. Right. The kids were born. We were all one happy family. And right. When it was time for you to retire, or time for me to leave, or time for Marv to leave, we'd had a relationship that lasted for a long, long time and lasts until this day. That's changed some. The money is obviously much, much greater. And so when it is that large, there is an inordinate focus, or more focus on it than there was in the past. But the interesting thing about it is that the really good teams all look and act and focus on the same things. There is no internal dissension. There's a real relationship between the coaching staff and the players, and in many cases, a real relationship between the front office and the players. The game has changed. We now go 53 and a third yards wide, and the running quarterback, or the moving quarterback, if you will, is much more in vogue than it really was only Elway in your and my day, Steve. But that's the game is always evolving. That's normal. I think it's surprisingly, given the amount of money that's involved in pro football today, it is surprisingly similar to what it was like back in our day. The basics remain the same. You have to be, you can't be dumb and you can't be dirty. You got to play smart. You have to take care of the football. You have to be able to move the ball. You have to play defense above all. The Super Bowl was won. Tom Brady played a nice game, but the Super Bowl was won by the Tampa Bay Bucs defense,
right?
As it most always is. And so I think what Paul Brown used to call the eternal verities still remain the same. The package it's wrapped in changes, and the amount of money obviously has changed greatly. But I think, at its core, it's still the same game.
Bill, having sat in the general manager's chair for as long as you did with 3 different franchises, I wanted to get your take on this, because if there is one thing from the front office chair that seems to have changed, not to dismiss the fact that you pulled off one of the biggest trades in league history, certainly team history, with the Cornelius Bennett deal, but it just seems like there is a greater propensity to trade significant assets in this league, and obviously we're witnessing that this offseason with quarterback swaps and such, but it just seems like this new wave of general managers is more apt to trade players, and the currency by which it moves back and forth across the league just seems to be more prevalent than it was, when you were running football teams. I'm just curious for your take on why you think that is.
Well, first of all, I'm not sure it's entirely true when you add it up every year about who moves and who doesn't, as opposed to rumors about movement and trades. In baseball, you have the hot stove league, right? There's nothing to do in the dead of winter than dream up trades. And so a lot of that happens in the NFL. Russell Wilson hasn't moved.
Right.
Jimmy Garoppolo hasn't moved. Deshaun Watson hasn't moved. Those were all the big stories of the offseason. So that's one thing. The second is there's so much more media to talk about these things, and in some cases dream them up, that it seems as though there's always churn. There have always been big trades, and they most typically revolve around high draft choices, because those are the premium picks where you get the players that change franchises and change careers. And so this recent trade with San Francisco is proof of that. Now, we don't know which quarterback they're going to take, but they're going to take one, that's for sure. And that's going to cause a ripple effect either now or at the end of next year. I suspect at the end of next year with Garoppolo going somewhere. So that's a little different, but not much. When you think about the Cornelius Bennett trade, it was a slew of draft choices for the running back, going from the Rams to the Colts, and Greg Bell going to the Rams. By the way, in Indianapolis, I once referred to it in Indianapolis when I was working for the Colts as the Cornelius Bennett trade, and I was immediately corrected by any number of people who said it's the Eric Dickerson trade. I said,
okay. It's all which office you're sitting in, I think, right? I mean,
yeah, it sure is.
That's great.
But I don't think there's always movement with premier draft choices. The one thing that's changed is the tanking. I mean, that didn't exist years ago. In fact, it's only recent, and that's a function of analytics people who I believe incorrectly and without any validity believe that if you accumulate a slew of choices, somehow or other you'll get smart about who you draft. It doesn't work that way, and history shows you that it doesn't. But that's the new trend.
The only reason I brought up that trade conversation, Bill, was because. And these stand out as examples. You used to only see potential franchise quarterbacks change teams at the tail end of their careers, Joe Montana, for example, or on draft weekend. Eli Manning, Phillip Rivers, stuff like that. John Elway, things like that. Now you're seeing Matthew Stafford going to one place, Jared Goff going the other. Here's Carson Wentz going to Indy after the relationship deteriorated. I just don't recall off the top of my head too many of those. I'm sure you're probably going to give me about 7 examples of when those happened when you were a GM, but that's why it seemed different to me.
Well, Vince Ferragamo was one. He still had time left on his career and his contract when he came to us. That's one that comes to mind right away. And of course, Joe Ferguson left here when Vince came in. That was a little bit just a little like Goff and Stafford.
And I wanted to ask you this as well as, you were the guy who signed Jim Kelly after he took off and went to the USFL. So you got all kinds of experience dealing with USFL, World Football League, NFL Europe. All of those were very, very different. The CFL, of course, has always been around. What kind of pressure is there for a team, and how important? You saw, the Bills draft Josh Allen and develop him over the course of 3 years, and in this day and age, taking 2 years, and then in your third year getting it, taking 2 years to develop a quarterback seems like infinite patience. Whereas back in the day, you had to wait two years even to sign the guy that you drafted. So give us some insight into your mind about those situations.
You're 100% correct. The only thing that's changed in terms of quarterback development is the impatience of the media and the fans. A quarterback, no matter who he is, whether it's Peyton Manning or Jim Kelly, whomever, doesn't matter. John Elway, it doesn't matter. It takes them 3 years in your system to learn how to play the right way, to run a team, to understand how to manipulate a defense, to manage the game, to do all the things that it takes to win in the National Football League. What's changed today? Number one, they're like, and we're seeing it in every draft in the last 4 years, they're NBA one and dones. They're just prospects. They got big arms. That's what Josh was coming in. And it took him 3 years to learn, as it should have. That's what it takes. That hasn't changed. What's changed is the anointing on draft day, the expectations, and then when the guy in his rookie year makes rookie mistakes, whoa, he might be a bust. And then in his second year, when he struggles a little bit for whatever reason, may or may not occur, it's get him out of town. He's not the guy. He's not good enough. And Darnold is a prime example of that. We don't know whether Darnold can play or not. The poor guy's been hurt for a fair amount of time. And then on top of it, he has nobody to play with. He has no talent surrounding him. So we don't know whether he's good, bad, or indifferent. The fact of the matter is that they may sweep him out of town and go in a different direction. That's media anointing in the first instance when it should never happen. And second of all, it's the impatience of the media and the fans for the guy to become Patrick Mahomes overnight. Patrick Mahomes, by the way, sat for 1 full year. 1 full year. So it doesn't change. The landscape hasn't changed. The atmosphere surrounding it has. And I hesitate to do this, but you have to in order to make the point. Poor Mitchell Trubisky. I mean, welcome to Buffalo. You're in heaven, man. You get a chance to be in an offense that fits his skill set, and he gets a chance to learn behind Josh and be coached by a great coaching staff who will know how to use him. It's the ideal place for him. It's a match made in heaven. And he ought to thank his lucky stars that the Bills wanted him. But he had no chance coming to Chicago. Zero chance. He played 13 games in college. How could you expect to put him in a game and allow him to play at a level that was right. that was even commensurate with professionalism in the NFL? It's not possible. They're asking far too much to the guy. And because this is not the correct statistic, but it's in the ballpark. There have been 55 Super Bowls. Over 40 of them have been won by quarterbacks that we would consider Hall of Famers or potential Hall of Famers. So everybody knowing that says, boy, we got to get one. So now it looks as though the first 4 picks in the draft, certainly 3, maybe 4, will be quarterbacks. And they'll be drafted way higher than they would have in 1986. Way, just because. Why? Because you need one.
Right.
That doesn't mean that they're going to succeed. In fact, that this is an accurate statistic. 50% of all first-round quarterbacks fail.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
But it's part of the reason that Bill's talking about. You don't give the guy enough time. You don't build it around him, and then you say he's a bust, and media pressures you to do that. Last one here for me, Bill, because we only got about a minute left, and we appreciate the time. I wanted to get your take on this one as well. The Bills have proposed a thing to the competition committee. I think it's going before ownership, that in May, presumably, that will ask about enacting a hiring practice for head coaches and any position coaches, for that matter, who would be in line for a promotion with a new team, to not allow interviews until after the championship games, and not allow any hirings of any kind, including head coaches, until after the Super Bowl. Having sat in a GM chair, and when you've had to make a change, wanting to do it probably yesterday, can you see this gaining any kind of traction and telling owners you got to wait till after the Super Bowl to get your new guy in and started?
First of all, I'm 100% in favor of it. It wouldn't hurt a thing, but I doubt that it will pass, because a change of this type is viewed as competitive, and owners and GMs are so competitive and so jealous of their abilities to go out and find the right guy that I doubt that it'll get the number of votes necessary to pass. But I think it's a great idea. It would be good for the game. It would be good for minority coaches. There's nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. You have to put some teeth into it, obviously, which the league office, I'm sure, is not thrilled about. But it's a great idea. With the fact that we're talking about it is a good thing, because over time, people tend to think about it and then say, you know what, that's not a bad idea. And pretty soon it becomes mainstream. So good for Mr. and Mrs. Pagula and the Bills for putting it up there, and hopefully it'll gain some traction.
Bill, thanks so much. Great seeing you, my friend, and hope we'll have you back again sometime.
Always a pleasure, buddy. Thank you.
All right.
Best to everybody in Buffalo.
Thanks. That's Bill Polian, Hall of Famer. We have to take a break. Steve and I to close things up when we come back here on One Bills Live. What have we learned? Brought to you by Skyworks, the official construction equipment rental company of the Buffalo Bills. Tell you talk to Bill Polian for 20 minutes, you'll learn a lot. This guy is a font.
I know, just
of
bottle
football
it up and
information.
listen to him. It's just really amazing. It's
My
so fun,
God.
and we love it because we're neck deep in football every day. But then you talk to him, and it's like, yeah, that's why I love it.
Well,
right there is why I love it.
Yeah, I'm glad I got his take on the Bills' proposal. He likes it, and thinks it has some merit. I do agree with him that I think it would give more opportunities to some minority candidates, which is a train that the league is trying to drive, not with as much success as they'd like. You wonder if a proposal like that could change that course for the league. He likes it. He doesn't think it'll pass this year, but, as we've seen, a lot of the proposals that competition committee brings to ownership doesn't always pass the first year, the second year, sometimes even the third year. But when owners have time to think about things, they eventually pass.
Here's why I think it might have a chance this year, is because in a vacuum, now that everybody's got all settled and stuff, they'll say, you know what, it makes a lot of sense, because what are we going to use? If the guys aren't coached for 15 years, what do I care about the first 3 weeks being late? You know what I'm saying? I think that's got a chance to fly, maybe.
I'm on vacay for the next week. Matty Glab will be in to fill in for me with Steve, Armandel Salguero, and Greg Cosell on tomorrow here on One Bills Live.